Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Read Aloud. You're welcome to move up since we're kind of a small audience today, and we do have refreshments in the back. If you'd like coffee or tea, please help yourself. We've got a really wonderful program for you. I'm very happy to welcome Candace, Stout and Cody, Henderhan from the Department of Art Education, and they're going to be reading from a book called Flower Teachers, and I'm very eager to hear more about that. So thanks to all of you for coming.
The readings that we share today are drawn from the narrative of 30 public school teachers who have spent their careers in teaching in the visual arts in classrooms from Montana to Maine. They're part of an ongoing phenomenological study of classroom teachers' interpretations of their lives in our public schools. I call them flower teachers because they began teaching in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and continue through today. In fact, they are on the brink of retirement. Several of them retired last year, several more this year. So about half of these 30 teachers are still in the classroom, but looking forward to very soon an active retirement. I'd like to begin by reading from Chapter 1, which is introduces the context of the research study. And then all of the readings that we share after that chapter are the narratives of the teachers themselves, who, by the way, they're written narratives. And by the way, most of these teachers said, I can engage in this written inquiry, but I'm not a good writer. But I think you'll find that to be very different. And then, as I said, the remainder of the readings will be their eloquent narratives. We will also articulate the questions that we pose to the teachers, those questions that they're responding to. So as I said, the first chapter actually establishes the context of the phenomenological narrative study. A generation of teachers is about to empty their desks, pack their belongings, and close the doors of their classrooms for the last time. These are the veteran teachers who, from the 1960s through today, have dedicated over 30 years of their lives to teaching the visual arts in elementary and secondary classrooms across the nation. As one century ends and a new one begins, they are on the brink of retirement. These are the teachers who were educated and came of age in the late 1960s and who first opened the doors of their classrooms in the 60s and early 70s. I call them the flower teachers, for they were part of that youth generation, donning their bell-bottoms and mini skirts at 6 a.m. and humming the tunes of Simon and Garfunkel as they drove to school in their Volkswagen Beetles. Conservatively, each of these individuals has logged in some 60,000 hours of classroom instruction. Collectively, they have touched the lives of thousands of children. They are a waning generation of teaching professionals who, more than any before, have experienced a fast and furious flow of trends, issues, and reform movements in education. They thrived on books like Postman and Weingartner's Teaching as a Subversive Activity, Lowenfeld's Creative and Mental Growth, and Bell Kaufman's Up the Down Staircase, and Alvin Toffler's Future Shock. They were intrigued by the idealism in Summerhill, A.S. Neal's radical approach to child rearing. And when they entered their first classrooms, they witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of inequality, poverty, neglect, those things that they had only read about in the impassioned books of Jonathan Kozol, John Holt, Richard Wright, and Paulo Freire. These were the young teachers who deconstructed classroom walls, ushering in a new era of humanistic, open education. They were the vanguard faculty who welcomed racial integration and stood waiting as the school buses boarded their students, carrying some to the suburbs, some to the projects of the inner city. They were the teachers who convinced the school boards, administrators, and parents of the essential need for the arts in the core curriculum of a school. They are the faculty who fought the hard-won battle for a multicultural curriculum. It was their commitment and effort that introduced African American, Native American, Asian, Hispanic, and female voices into the arts in our public schools. They have taught in times of sadness and turmoil through loss and assassinations of political and spiritual leaders, the introduction of drugs and violence into the schools, and now the ultimate brutality of the 11th day of September and the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. They have taught, too, in times of prosperity, of innovation and hope. In their classrooms, children saw humankind launch into space and walk on the moon. They have seen unprecedented advancement in science and technology and have experienced the proliferation of new schools, instructional materials, and means. Now, at the opening of a new century, as seasoned veterans and master teachers, they are experiencing the wonder of the World Wide Web and the social, pedagogical, and technological complexities that come with it. For this generation, the sweep of the educational pendulum has been long, deep, and pronounced. At the close of the 20th century, they are part of the capstone generation, a culmination and summary of the philosophy and practice of an era of American education. At the opening of the 21st century, they are nearing retirement, but before they bid their farewells, there must be some summary, some meaning assigned to the richness of their individual and collective experiences. Most important, there must be some lessons to learn from these veteran teachers about children and life in our schools, about teaching and learning in a rapidly changing society, and not least of all, about these formative years in the field of education. Among the interview questions that I posed to these teachers is this one. During your own formative years in the 1960s and early 70s, in secondary school or college, what were some of your experiences? Who were the people? What were the events that shaped your attitudes, values, basic assumptions, and philosophy about life and about teaching? In other words, what in particular was it about being a youth and being educated in the 1960s or early 70s that made you the kind of person and the kind of teacher that you are? So this first narrative comes from Ken Wilkie. He has been a teacher for 30 years at Riverside Elementary School in Princeton, New Jersey. And Ken writes this. So this is the thing that happened with us. Where were we when Kennedy was assassinated? That's the frame of reference. I was in the 7th grade in music class. It was 3 months after the March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King. It seemed like this. It was the point where you're coming of age, becoming aware of things. And here was a world that was extremely dramatic for a kid developing awareness. Adolescence is always a challenging time, a time when you're going to question values and wonder where you're going. And here we had on television, in the streets, everywhere around you, a world that was changing, that was being challenged. It's as if the whole society was going through a period of adolescence. And so it was a very exciting time to be of this age. Going to demonstrations, going to rock concerts, being a vital part of political activities on campus. So what this did was make me look at the role of education. The teacher is somebody who is part of changing the world, of making change and helping others see it. We weren't just out for ourselves. We weren't just going out to get a job and make money. That was looked upon as selfish and not full enough and not noble enough. You know, people talk about going into the Peace Corps. And I remember I had friends who did this, and they had nothing to offer in terms of services or skills. They just wanted to go and do something. This is that sort of exotic ideal of going off and having a genuine effect, being a hero to somebody, being a hero to yourself maybe. And I think that kind of steers you into teaching, to be some place where you can make changes, where you can make a difference in people's lives. And it's very exciting.